The early morning sun had just begun to pierce through the dusty windows of a small, cluttered aircraft workshop. Machines hummed, metal scraped against metal, and the smell of oil lingered thick in the air. In the center of it all, 28-year-old engineer Clarence Claire Nash leaned over the fuselage of a battered P-51 Airacobra, his hands streaked with grease. Sweat glistened on his brow, not from exertion alone, but from the weight of an idea he dared not speak aloud. Outside, the world was collapsing. Europe was ablaze under the roar of Luftwaffe engines, and the United States, still officially neutral, watched from across the Atlantic as Hitler's blitzkrieg reshaped the continent. Every headline spoke of cities in flames, armies advancing, and planes cutting through the skies with lethal precision. And yet, in this modest American workshop, Claire's battlefield was not yet in Europe. It was in the mind of a man wrestling with rules, regulations, and the invisible walls of military bureaucracy. For months, Claire had been sketching designs that defied convention. He envisioned a fighter aircraft faster, deadlier, and more agile than anything in service. The Army Air Corps considered his plans illegal, too radical, too risky. But Claire knew something others did not. The war that was engulfing Europe would eventually reach the skies of America. And the difference between survival and devastation would hinge on ingenuity, courage, and sometimes sheer audacity. As he adjusted the rudder controls of the prototype, his young assistant, a wiry mechanic named Joe Miller, peeked over his shoulder. "Are you sure this is going to fly?" Joe asked, half in jest, half in fear. Claire didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the serrated lines of the wing, the unconventional placement of the engine, the glint of a new type of ammunition feeder he'd secretly installed. He knew the answer would only become clear when the first test pilot dared to take it into the sky. Somewhere across the country in Washington, D.C., bureaucrats debated budgets, regulations, and the cost of unproven ideas. But in this small hangar in Inglewood, history was quietly being rewritten by a man who refused to accept that the impossible was off limits. And by the end of that year, the skies over the Pacific would reveal whether his gamble would save lives or cost them. Claire wiped his hands on a rag and stared out the window, the roar of distant aircraft engines punctuating the quiet morning. The world was changing, and he had chosen to change with it. The workshop had grown quieter. The hum of machines was replaced by the low murmur of anxious conversation. Test pilot Lieutenant Richard Rick Holstead stood beside the gleaming new prototype, helmet in hand, eyes scanning every bolt, every rivet. He had flown dozens of aircraft in his career, but something about this machine made him uneasy. It didn't look like the planes he knew. Its engine placement was unconventional. The fuselage narrower, the wings sharper, almost aggressive. Claire approached him slowly, holding a worn notebook filled with scribbles, calculations and diagrams. "Rick," he said, his voice calm but insistent, "what we've built here, it's not just a plane. It's the difference between being caught off guard and dominating the sky. I need you to trust it." Rick frowned. "Claire, you know the regulations. The Air Corps hasn't certified this design. If something goes wrong..." His voice trailed off. Claire didn't flinch. "If something goes wrong, we'll deal with it. But if we wait for approval, men will die. The war in Europe isn't waiting, and neither is Japan. If we don't act, the sky over America will become a graveyard." Outside the hangar, the sun beat down relentlessly. Mechanics tightened bolts, checked fuel lines, and whispered prayers under their breath. The air carried a tension that could almost be cut with a knife. Every second counted. Every decision mattered. Rick climbed into the cockpit, feeling the unfamiliar contours press against him. He ran through pre-flight checks with the precision of a man trained to survive. But his mind kept circling back to the whispers he'd heard in Washington. Illegal modifications. Too risky. Reckless ambition. Yet as he gripped the throttle, he realized that history often favored the reckless. With a low rumble, the prototype's engine roared to life. Vibrations rattled through the fuselage, and dust lifted in clouds around the hangar floor. Claire and his team held their breath as Rick taxied down the makeshift runway, the world outside fading into a blur of heat and tension. Then with a sudden surge, the aircraft lifted into the sky, defying doubts, regulations, and fear. For the first time, the dream that had kept Claire awake at night seemed real. And yet, even as the plane cut through the clouds, slicing toward the horizon, Claire knew the real test, the one that would decide the fate of thousands, had only just begun. May 3, 1941, Edwards Airfield, California, United States. The morning fog clung low to the runway, curling around the edges of hangars and scattering the first rays of sunlight. Lieutenant Rick Halstead emerged from the cockpit, his flight suit stained with oil and sweat, his face pale but alight with exhilaration. He had just completed the prototype's first full test flight. It had responded like a wild animal, agile, aggressive, unpredictable, but it had flown. And more importantly, it had survived. Claire watched from the edge of the tarmac, arms crossed, heart pounding. He had known the risks. Every bolt, every modification, every illegal adjustment he had forced through the bureaucracy had been a gamble. And now, seeing the aircraft soar with the grace and ferocity he had envisioned, a flicker of triumph lit his chest. Nearby, a small group of Air Corps officers had gathered, their skepticism etched deep into their faces. Major Leonard Hawthorne, a veteran of countless procurement meetings, stepped forward. "This machine," he began cautiously, "it's unlike anything we've seen, but it's unstable, unpredictable. One miscalculation in combat could—" He let the words trail off, unwilling to finish the thought. Claire stepped closer, meeting Hawthorne's gaze evenly. "Major, the men in Europe are fighting aircraft just like this, only they don't have the modifications. The speed, the firepower we've engineered. Waiting for perfect stability isn't an option. We're not building a plane for today. We're building a plane for tomorrow." Rick, still catching his breath, added quietly, "I've flown hundreds of fighters. This is different. It's fast, but it turns on a dime. The guns hit exactly where you aim. If we get the right pilots in this, it could change everything." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had been trained to follow rules, to minimize risk, to approve designs through careful, measured bureaucracy. But rules were cold, and the war was coming closer every day. In that moment, standing on a windswept runway in May 1941, it became painfully clear that history might favor the bold, but it could just as easily punish the reckless. As Claire and Rick prepared the plane for its next flight, a sense of anticipation hung heavy in the air. Somewhere beyond the horizon, war was marching steadily toward the Pacific, and the question that neither man could answer was simple yet terrifying. Would this creation save lives, or would it end in disaster? June 12, 1941. Lockheed Aircraft Factory, Burbank, California, United States. The hum of machinery was deafening, a mechanical symphony of metal stamping, riveting, and welding. The factory floor smelled of hot steel and oil, punctuated by the occasional spark that danced across polished metal surfaces. Claire paced between rows of partially assembled aircraft, his mind racing faster than the engines around him. The prototype had flown, yes, but now the challenge was magnified. Could this radical design be mass-produced? Across the floor, dozens of mechanics and engineers worked tirelessly, some whispering about the illegal design, others simply following Claire's exacting instructions. Every measurement, every modification had to be replicated perfectly. A single error could turn the deadliest fighter into a death trap. Claire paused by a young engineer named Evelyn Monroe, who was carefully aligning a new wing section. "Check the recoil dampers again," he said, voice steady but urgent. "If these aren't perfect, the guns could tear the fuselage apart on first firing." Evelyn nodded, understanding the stakes. The war in Europe had already claimed hundreds of pilots' lives. Here in a sunlit California factory, they were trying to prevent the same fate from reaching American skies. In Washington, the tension was mounting. Air Corps officials were reluctant to fund a full production line for what they called a speculative experiment. But Claire, fueled by both desperation and conviction, pushed back. He arranged meetings, drafted memos, and argued tirelessly that time was not a luxury they could afford. "The Axis powers aren't waiting for paperwork," he told them. Neither should we. By mid-afternoon, the first batch of new fighters began rolling off the assembly line. Engineers held their breath as engines roared to life, and test pilots circled the runway, their planes slicing through the sky with unprecedented speed and precision. The factory was alive with hope, but also with tension. Every successful flight was a triumph, every mechanical glitch a potential catastrophe. That night, Claire stood alone on the factory roof, staring at the horizon where the sun had sunk blood red into the Pacific. The stakes were clear. The war was coming, whether America was ready or not. And somewhere in the skies beyond that horizon, the first real battle was waiting to test whether his illegal idea would become the deadliest weapon America had ever known, or a tragic footnote in history. August 7, 1941, Muroc Dry Lake, California, United States. The desert sun burned relentlessly. Over the flat expanse of Muroc Dry Lake, dust swirled in golden spirals as a small squadron of the new fighters taxied into position. Lieutenant Rick Halstead climbed into the lead aircraft, fingers trembling slightly as he gripped the controls. This was no ordinary test flight. Today they would push the limits: speed, maneuverability, and firepower, all in conditions meant to simulate the chaos of combat. Claire stood nearby, notebook in hand, watching every movement with hawk-like intensity. The men around him whispered about the risks: if the wing flexes too much, if the engine overheats. But Claire didn't flinch. He had already made his decision. These planes had to perform, and failure wasn't an option. Rick's voice crackled over the radio. All systems nominal. Engaging takeoff sequence. Engines roared, shaking the dry lake bed as the fighters accelerated. Dust kicked up like a storm at their tails, and in a heartbeat the planes were airborne, slicing across the sky with breathtaking speed. The test maneuvers were brutal. Sharp turns at extreme altitudes, rapid dives, and simulated dogfights pushed the prototype to its breaking point. Every pilot felt the aircraft strain and flex beneath them, but the fighters responded with a precision and agility that left even the most skeptical observers speechless. As Rick looped overhead, Claire couldn't hide a grim smile. This was the moment he had been building toward, a plane designed not just to survive, but to dominate. Yet even amid triumph, an uneasy tension lingered. These machines, revolutionary as they were, had been created in defiance of rules. If they failed in battle, the blame would fall squarely on those who had dared to bend the system, and countless lives would be lost. When the squadron landed, engines hissing and pilots panting, Claire walked among them quietly. He knew the real test wasn't on the dry lake. It was coming soon, over distant oceans, against enemies who had already claimed the skies. And in that realization, he felt both fear and determination. History was about to arrive, and he had just given America a weapon unlike any it had ever known. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, United States. The morning air was calm, almost serene, as the first light of dawn reflected off the calm waters of Pearl Harbor. Sailors went about their routines, unaware that the world around them was about to erupt into chaos. Across the Pacific, Japanese aircraft were forming into deadly swarms, engines slicing the quiet sky like sharpened knives. Back in California, Claire Nash sat in his office, staring at a telegram stamped with urgency. The words were simple but devastating. Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor. Heavy casualties. Immediate review of Pacific defenses required. The war, which had seemed distant for so long, had arrived at America's doorstep. For Claire, there was no time to mourn. Every lesson, every secret modification, every illegal adjustment he had pushed through now carried weight heavier than ever before. He grabbed the phone and barked orders to the factory floor. Accelerate production. Ensure every aircraft is combat ready. Train pilots immediately. Lives would depend on it. Meanwhile, test pilot Rick Halstead was sent to the West Coast training fields, briefing newly drafted pilots on the radical new fighter. The aircraft was unlike anything they had seen. faster, deadlier, a machine built for one purpose, dominance in the skies. Yet fear lingered in every word Rick spoke, because while the plane was extraordinary, it was still unproven in the crucible of real combat. The nation braced itself. Reports poured in of burning ships, falling bombs, and the loss of thousands of lives. Congress declared war, and the American military shifted from peacetime caution to wartime urgency. Claire and his team worked feverishly, nights blending into mornings, sweat and oil coating every surface of the factory. Every second mattered. Every bolt, every engine, every plane was a potential line between survival and disaster. And as the sun set on that fateful December day, Claire stared at the horizon, knowing one truth with chilling clarity: the war had reached American soil, and the fighters he had risked everything to build would soon face their ultimate test. The sky was about to become a battlefield, and history would judge whether his daring gamble had been salvation or folly. March 15th, 1942, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The humid air clung to every surface, heavy with the smell of salt, sweat, and burning fuel. The Pacific Theater had become a crucible of fire and steel, where every decision could mean life or death. American pilots, some barely out of training, scrambled to their new fighters as Japanese Zeros streaked across the sky with lethal precision. Lieutenant Rick Halstead gripped the controls of his aircraft, heart hammering. This was the moment they had trained for, but nothing could fully prepare a man for the chaos of combat. He glanced at the dashboard, feeling the subtle hum of the engine and the responsiveness of the controls. The plane reacted like an extension of his body, swift, precise, and merciless. It was the culmination of Claire Nash's years of relentless work, the illegal design that had once been doubted in sterile offices, now alive in the skies above. Guadalcanal. Explosions rocked the air, tracer rounds streaking past. Rick banked sharply, narrowly avoiding the tail of a Zero, and returned fire. The new fighter's advanced weaponry roared, and he watched in awe as the enemy aircraft faltered. Torn apart by firepower they could not anticipate. Around him the air was a deadly ballet of machines, skill, and sheer nerve. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Claire received the first reports from the Pacific. Pilots were emerging victorious against overwhelming odds. The plane's speed and firepower were turning the tide in skirmishes that had once seemed unwinnable. But with every triumph came a sobering reminder: these victories had a cost. Lives were still being lost, and the war showed no mercy for the unprepared. As night fell over the Solomon Islands, smoke and fire painting the horizon, Claire sat alone in his office, listening to the distant hum of aircraft engines on the radio. Relief, pride, and dread mixed in a strange, bitter cocktail. His invention was proving itself, yes, but the stakes had never been higher. The war was far from over, and every success now carried the shadow of what might come next. The deadliest American fighter had arrived in battle, and with it a new chapter of the Sky War had begun. June 4th, 1942. Midway Atoll, Pacific Ocean. The dawn over Midway broke in muted shades of grey and gold. The calm of the morning at odds, with the tension gripping every pilot and sailor stationed on the atoll. Intelligence reports had predicted an imminent Japanese attack, and the U.S. Navy braced for the storm. On the flight deck, Lieutenant Rick Halstead checked his fighter once more, fingers tracing the sleek fuselage as if seeking reassurance. Every plane, every bolt, every modification he had flown in previous battles now mattered more than ever. Claire Nash, back on the mainland, followed the updates with a mixture of pride and anxiety. He had designed this fighter not merely to match the enemy, but to surpass it, to give pilots a chance against the formidable Zeros. Yet even as he saw initial reports of enemy losses, he could not ignore the human cost. Each successful engagement was accompanied by a tally of wounded or missing men, a reminder that innovation alone could not erase the dangers of war. The battle erupted in a violent symphony of smoke, fire, and speed. Rick's fighter dove and banked with surgical precision, evading enemy fire while returning devastating attacks. The plane responded instinctively, as though it knew the stakes of every maneuver. Around him, formations of American and Japanese aircraft collided in the sky, metal tearing, engines screaming. The horizon streaked with tracer fire and explosions. By mid-afternoon, the tide had turned. Reports confirmed the sinking of several Japanese carriers, an unimaginable victory for the American forces. The new fighters, once dismissed as illegal and experimental, had proven decisive. Claire allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph, imagining the pilots who owed their lives to a machine born in a sunlit hangar in California, conceived in defiance of rules and brought to life by relentless determination. But even in victory, Claire understood the war was far from over. Each engagement brought new challenges, new enemies, and new tests of his creation. The skies were no longer simply a place of invention. They were now the proving ground for the deadliest American fighter ever built, and the stakes had never been higher. October 23rd, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The jungle humidity pressed down like a living weight, carrying the scent of salt, gunpowder, and sweat. On the airstrip carved hastily from the tropical terrain, American pilots hurried to their fighters, knowing that the Japanese were preparing another raid. Lieutenant Rick Halstead ran his hands over the fuselage of his plane, feeling the vibrations of a machine that had become more than metal. It was a lifeline, a guardian, a symbol of hope against overwhelming odds. Claire Nash, thousands of miles away in California, received radio updates as the battle unfolded. Each report confirmed what he had dreamed, feared, and fought for. His design was not just surviving, it was dominating. The new fighters turned the tide of engagements, their speed and firepower unmatched. Pilots, who had once quivered at the thought of facing Zeros, now felt a surge of confidence, their skill amplified by the machine they flew. But victory was never clean. Smoke rose from downed aircraft, and the air was thick with the cries of the wounded. Each engagement carried the weight of human cost, a constant reminder that innovation alone could not spare lives. Claire understood this better than anyone. The illegal design, the countless sleepless nights, the endless arguments with bureaucrats. It had all led to this moment. And yet every triumph was shadowed by the price paid in blood and courage. Rick banked sharply to evade enemy fire, the fighter responding like a living creature under his command. The roar of guns and engines filled the sky, a chaotic symphony of destruction. In that chaos, he realized something profound. This plane was not just a machine. It was a testament to ingenuity, defiance, and the belief that one person's vision could change the course of history. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Pacific in streaks of fire and shadow, Claire allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The deadliest American fighter had proven itself in combat. The gamble had paid off, but the war was far from over. And for every victory, there were new battles looming on the horizon, demanding courage, sacrifice, and relentless innovation. August 15th, 1945. Washington, D.C., United States. The city was alive with the muted hum of cautious celebration. The war that had stretched across continents, oceans, and skies was finally over. In the halls of the Pentagon, officials and engineers gathered quietly. Some still in uniform, some in civilian clothes, all bearing the marks of years spent in relentless effort. Among them stood Claire Nash, older now, his hands still bearing traces of grease and ink, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and pride. It had been 4 years since that first illegal design had left the small workshop in Inglewood. 4 years of experimentation, of arguments with bureaucrats, of risk, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. 4 years of watching pilots climb into the sky in machines that had once been dismissed as impossible. And now, the plane that had started as a gamble, a whispered defiance against convention, had played a crucial role in turning the tide of war. Claire wandered through the exhibits of captured enemy aircraft and models of American fighters, pausing at the prototype that had begun it all. The sleek lines, the unconventional engine placement, the deadly precision of its guns, all were reminders of what one person's vision could achieve when matched with courage, determination, and a refusal to accept limits. Lieutenant Rick Holstead, now a decorated ace, approached quietly. "You changed the game, Claire," he said, voice heavy with emotion. "Those planes, they saved lives. They gave us a chance when the odds were against us." Claire nodded, but his eyes remained distant, reflecting not only triumph, but the weight of the cost. Thousands had fought, and many had died, in the shadow of the machines he had helped create. Victory was theirs, but it had come at a staggering price, as fireworks erupted across the skyline, marking the end of a global conflict. Claire realized something that no award or accolade could ever fully convey. History was not written by rules or regulations. It was written by those willing to risk everything, to defy convention, and to believe that one daring idea could change the world. And in that realization, amid the cheers and the light of celebration, he felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, in the skies above the Pacific and beyond, his creation had soared, fought, and ultimately helped to shape the course of history. The war was over. The deadliest American fighter had proven its worth, and the mechanic's illegal idea had become legend.